Hi everybody, I'm Any New Province, and today I'm super excited to kick off M19 season by trying to figure out if Viashino Pyromancer is possibly Pauper playable. Viashino Pyromancer is a brand new creature that was released with M19. It costs 1 and a red for a 2/1 Viashino wizard, and when it enters the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to target player or planeswalker. Viashino Pyromancer is really exciting in a couple of ways. It resembles Keldon Marauders in that it only has to enter the battlefield to make sure it deals 2 damage to your opponent. It's also a wizard, which is a tribe that's been supported since Magic's very beginning. That means there's probably some synergies out there that we can take advantage of simply because of its tribe. Finally, its stats are evenly costed. While it isn't a grizzly bear, it still resembles something called a goblin piker, a 2/1 for 2 mana which can attack just fine. For all of those reasons, I've decided to test Viashino Pyromancer's magical metal in a deck I'm calling Gruul Wizard Tribal. First, I'm going to explain some of the other wizards that we're running that help reinforce our wizard tribal theme and enable other wizard-based synergies in our deck. The first and my favorite wizard in this deck by far is Granger Guildmage. It costs 1 green mana for a 1/1 human wizard. You can pay 1 red and tap Granger Guildmage to deal 1 damage to any target and 1 damage to you. Granger Guildmage does have another activated ability for white mana, but we can't produce it. I guess just in case it comes up, you can pay 1 white mana and tap it to give target creature first strike until end of turn. While Granger Guildmage isn't as large as a Kuambaj, which is, it does do a pretty good impression, mowing down any of our opponent's X1s and allowing our Viashino Pyromancers to continue attacking through a wide board. Even though our deck can dirtle, it's also very aggressive, meaning that Granger Guildmage's ability can also be used to close out the game if our opponent does manage to assemble a board that's too hard to attack through. Our other wizards are Ghitu Journey Mages, our true payoff for the wizard tribal theme. They cost 2 and a red for a 3/2, and when they enter the battlefield, if you control another wizard, they deal 2 damage to each opponent. Curving a Pyromancer into a Journey Mage means that we hit our opponent for 4 damage while just resolving our creatures. We didn't even have to attack. As I go on explaining the rest of the deck, you'll also see how we're going to take advantage of triggering these abilities multiple times. While this next creature is not a wizard, it does belong right alongside them, given that its enter the battlefield ability has to be triggered multiple times to make it truly useful. It's Elvish Visionary, which costs 1 and a green for a 1/1 elf shaman, and when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. My intention was to make this deck somewhat of a Gruul kitty decks. Kitty decks are all about recurring creatures and enter the battlefield triggers to draw more cards and gain more value than your opponent. The kitty decks we're used to seeing, however, usually use cards like Prophetic Prism, artifacts that you can recur multiple times to get their enter the battlefield draw card abilities. Green and red don't have the same kind of quantity of cards that can recur artifacts, so I had to find a way to get more value than my opponent with other synergies. That's where this next group of value generating cards comes in, starting with Pulse of Murasa, which costs 2 and a green for an instant that returns target creature or land card from your graveyard to its owner's hand. You gain 6 life. 6 life is already a massive life swing, but if we can take full advantage of Pulse of Murasa, we'll be able to recur our Viashino Pyromancers, Ghitu Journey Mages, or Elvish Visionaries to draw more cards or deal more damage to our opponent's face. Next is Sprout Swarm, which falls in and out of favor, but is always an excellent grindy card if a game goes unintentionally long. Sprout Swarm costs 1 and a green for an instant with Convoke, which means your creatures can help you cast the spell. They add 1 mana of their color if you tap them to cast it, or 1 generic mana. It's your choice. It also has buyback 3 for 3 generic mana, which means you can pay 3 more mana or tap 3 more creatures for it to go back to your hand after it resolves. It creates a 1/1 green Saproling creature token. Finally, we have Essence Wardens. I'm a huge fan of a little bit of incidental life gain in any deck, and this is also a great 1-drop to recur with the next few creatures I'm going to explain. Essence Warden costs 1 green for a 1/1 elf shaman, and whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life. We're going to be bouncing our creatures, recurring them with Pulse of Murasas, and replaying them. We should stand to gain a ton of life off of this elf as the game goes long. While I did jump through some hoops and find unique ways in these colors to recur creatures and get extra value out of them, we are running some typical core Skyfisher type recursion as well. First is Invasive Species. It costs 2 and a green for a 3/3 insect, and when it enters the battlefield, you return another permanent you control to its owner's hand. It's a little bit of a letdown that Invasive Species doesn't have evasion like Core Skyfisher, but it has 3 power, so it should be able to attack through those Augur of Boluses no problem. Next, we have Horned Kavu, which is another one of my favorite cards in this deck. It's super powerful, but really risky. It costs red, green for a 3/4 Kavu, and when it enters the battlefield, return a red or green creature you control to its owner's hand. This Kavu is going to play somewhat similarly to Greenbelt Rampager that we've seen in Standard recently. We're not always going to get an undercosted body on the turn we want to, but when we do, it's going to be incredibly powerful. It's also okay to wait until we have enough creatures on board that we can definitely bounce one with the Kavu and stick it, even if our opponent has a removal spell, because after we bounce almost any of our creatures, we're going to get extra value from it coming back down. Going alongside with our kind of clunky card advantage package is another kind of clunky card advantage spell. This is Faithless Looting, which costs 1 red and lets you draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. It also has flashback for 2 and a red, which means you can pay 2 and a red, exile this card from your graveyard, and cast it again. Faithless Looting is always a little bit risky because you never know what you're going to find off of the top of your deck. If you only have Faithless Looting and a land in hand, you might end up pitching 2 very critical cards after casting it. That being said, when you flash it back out of your graveyard, you really feel like you got a good deal. Our last package is all about interaction and burn. We're lacking a lot of evasion in our deck, so when the board gets gummed up, we're going to need a way to win around our opponent's blockers. Also, this helps us survive in the early game if we have to bounce a few creatures before we can manifest a good board. First, we have Firebolt, which I wish said can't be countered by Spellstutter Sprite, but that's okay, it's still a great spell. Firebolt costs 1 red for a sorcery that deals 2 damage to any target. You can also flash it back out of your graveyard for 4 and a red. We're also running Lightning Bolt, the most efficient piece of interactive burn in the Pauper format. Lightning Bolt costs 1 red and deals 3 damage to any target. Our last non-land card is a single copy of Electrickery. Electrickery costs 1 red for an instant and deals 1 damage to target creature you don't control. That seems pretty bad, but it also has the Overload ability. It costs 1 and a red, and you can cast this spell for its Overload cost. If you do, change its text, replacing all instances of target with each. I've included a copy of Electrickery to hopefully draw into with our Elvish Visionaries because it completely hoses some strategies. If our opponents get off the board quick and they can get around all the Firebolts and Lightning Bolts we're casting, this should sweep away enough blockers for us to attack for lethal with Gitu Journey Mages and Viashino Pyromancers. Alright, let's have a look at this mana base. First, we have Forgotten Cave, a cycling land. You can pay 1 red and discard it to draw a new card. Awesome when you're flooding out. We have 2 Gruul Turf Karoos. They enter the battlefield tapped. When they enter the battlefield, you return a land you control to your hand. When they become untapped, you can add red and green with them. We have a Calmy Garden for recurring with our Gruul Turfs and our Invasive Species. They enter the battlefield tapped, and when they enter the battlefield, you get a 0/1 green plant creature token. It can tap for our Sprout Swarms as well. We're running 1 copy of Radiant Fountain over any other life gain lands. It enters the battlefield and gains you 2 life, but only adds colorless, a small risk to pay for a little bit of extra life gain off of Gruul Turfs. We're also running 4 standard Pauper Duels in green and red. They're rugged highlands. They enter the battlefield tapped, and when they enter the battlefield, you gain 1 life. When they become untapped, they add red or green. For basics, we're running 6 forests and 5 mountains. This is a lot of basic lands with no fetches because we want to go turn 1 Granger Guildmage, turn 2 play a mountain, activate it, and kill one of our opponent's X1s. And there you have it, Gruul Wizard Tribal featuring the brand new Viashino Pyromancer. We're going to take this deck into a league at twitch.tv/AnyNewProvince. We're there every Tuesday night playing possibly Pauper playable decks. Before I go, I just want to remind you that you can like the video or subscribe to the channel down below. I'd seriously appreciate it. It's a great way to let me know you've enjoyed everything, and it really encourages me to keep making great Pauper content. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this deck tech, and hopefully I'll see you on Tuesday night.